Ladies and gentlemen, do you want to build the fastest gaming PC you can in 2023? Because if you do, you're in the right place. And we've grabbed an RTX 4090, the latest Intel 4900K CPU, and we're going to be putting together this pretty epic purple themed gaming PC. I've been wanting to do this for ages. I'm sure the whole thing is going to be beautiful when it's put together. And of course, we'll be putting this through its paces so you can see exactly how this performs in the latest titles. And actually, a massive thank you to Nvidia for really helpfully reaching out and wanting to sponsor this video, because I'm so privileged that they actually wanted to do a sponsored video around the release of Alan Wake 2, and we're going to be testing path tracing in it. And this is big for me because Alan Wake was one of my favorite games ever on the Xbox 360, so I can't wait to see what 2023 will bring to one of my favorite titles. Let's get our build on, shall we? And we're going to kickstart our build here today by doing the most important thing, which is clearing ourselves a nice amount of space. And we're going to start with the graphics card itself, because obviously if you are going to build the most powerful gaming PC that you can, most of your money really should be allocated towards the GPU. And this is the RTX 4090. It is the most powerful graphics card you can currently buy for gaming, and it is insane what this thing can do. It's not just like being able to play at 4K and even higher resolutions. It's not just being able to run them at sky-high frame rates, but it's also the capabilities that you get with software. So things like the brand new DLSS 3.5 with ray reconstruction and full path tracing in titles like Cyberpunk and Alan Wake 2. If you're looking for the best experience across the board, then clearly you are going to want to have all of the latest and greatest features, and this is going to be the hard to do it. Yes, it is not an inexpensive product by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want the best, it is quite literally sitting here on its desk. This is the Founders Edition as well, by the way. But obviously you can buy other cards, like the Gigabyte Aorus Master, which is quite a lot bigger than what is already a very big card, but it's up to you, and it's up to the style and availability, I guess, of each SKU when you check out. And while the graphics card is always going to be the most important component for gaming, you do also need to grab yourself a processor that can keep up with it. And it's a bit of a difficult / complex equation, really, because you've pretty much got two main options at this price point, which is this, the brand new one from Intel, the 14900K. This is actually the better all-round CPU, despite the fact that it uses an insane amount of power. But then actually in games, you can get slightly better performance in certain titles with the 7800X3D, but that is only an 8-core CPU. But it's not necessarily a clear-cut one way or the other. As I say, it's going to come down to personal preference and what it is that you actually need from your PC, just gaming performance, or I guess a bit more of an all-rounder. Best thing to do is check my Amazon affiliate links that are listed down below, and I'll give you the best options at the best price points pretty much for both Intel and AMD, so you can pick whatever one works best for you. And then the other thing that I alluded to at the start of this video, and something I'm really excited to do, because I don't think I've actually done this before, is to build ourselves a purple-themed gaming PC. And sadly, we're not doing hardline, because that really would look sick. But we do have a brand new case from a company I've not worked with before. This is called the APNX, that's the brand, C1, and this is not a cheap chassis. This is around about £150, but this purple color is a little bit more. It's not quite pearlescent. It's more of like a glossy matte finish at the same time. I know, it's a little bit weird. And that finish is a little bit more expensive, but as you can see, this is purple, and we're also going for this purple motherboard to match it. But as I will caveat when we're using this doesn't actually have USB BIOS flashback. So if you are going to go for a 14th gen CPU, you will need an older chip in order to update the BIOS on this. So again, I'll leave some other options down in the description below, because I'm not really too keen on that, to be honest, for most people. Completely toolless though, which is nice, with a very large tempered glass side panel. On the inside, we also don't have that much in the way of cable management. It's a little bit disappointing, I think, for £165. You're pretty much paying for the finish and for these more premium RGB fans that you do get as standard. But I can't help but think that this has got a lot of making up to do with the build process in order for this to be a very easy recommendation. But we've got this almost like split side panel construction, which is pretty cool. And then this is just one curved piece of metal, and I imagine that's one of the things that does bring the price of this up. The top should come off nice and easily, and this is a good opportunity to show you that finish. I mean, it's a very nice paint job on this. You're definitely paying for that paint, but it's very nice. And then I guess it's just a case of sliding this out. Yeah. There you go. That is something I've not really seen before on a chassis. That is a curved metal mesh panel. But if you look at the top here, once we've removed this, there is actually a full hub for both RGB and fan speed, which is great, especially when we have some decent fans that are pre-mounted, because we're not really going to have to do any faffing about with wiring up later. So that's the first look at our chassis, but now it's time to actually get our motherboard outside of the box. And this is definitely Asrock being a little bit different, but I do wish that they had put that USB BIOS flashback utility on it, because it clearly does mean that longevity of this board isn't going to be quite so good for new builders. If you're upgrading, as we mentioned earlier, it's not a problem. Just make sure to update and flash your BIOS before proceeding to put your new CPU in there. But for someone like me that's now using this and wanting to use 14th gen, it's just going to make it a lot harder than it needs to be, because when you actually look at just how attractive this board is and how different it is, I can really see the appeal, and I can see why loads of people are going to sort of go towards this. It's not for everybody. This is very much love it or hate it. But you've kind of made it a lot harder for people to buy it now, Asrock, which frankly I think is a bit silly, a bit short-sighted. But let's drop this down on top of our motherboard box, and then instead of grabbing our top-end i9 14900K, we're going to do something a little bit backwards just for now, which is to grab my 12100F that I have lying around, just so we can use this so that the whole thing will boot up and we can actually get into the BIOS, and then we can flash the newer BIOS onto it and then swap over to our 14th gen, which will then be recognized and received. If we don't do this, then chances are the motherboard is not going to be up to date enough, and it won't know what a 14900K is, and it'll say, no,
I'm not booting.
Not booting is bad. And that is the exact reason that I say if you are going for, I guess, any other case or color combination, I will leave an alternative motherboard down in the description down below that will have USB BIOS capability, so you won't have to have an existing CPU, because frankly, I'm doing this for the color, and that's about it. In terms of RGB memory, we're going for some DDR5, because this is a DDR5 compatible motherboard. And I would go as far to say actually that this is probably my favorite kit of memory at the moment. It's from G-Skill. It is their Trident Z5. This is an XMP kit rather than AMD Expo. That's going to be more suitable for AMD motherboards. But this is a CL30 kit of memory, 32 gigabytes, and it's running at a speed of 6,000 megahertz. You can go faster, but it doesn't always translate into more gaming performance. So it's not necessarily something I would say I would personally do, but it all comes down to price and performance at the time of checkout. We are also going for an SSD, of course. This is an M.2 Gen 4 drive, one of the fastest Gen 4 drives you can get. Some motherboards will support PCI Gen 5. We're doing a test on that next week, I think. Get subscribed if you're not already, so we can see the head-to-head gaming performance and whether they're worth it. But to be honest, spoiler alert, the drives are almost, or in some cases are, double the price. And frankly, most people would want to spend a bit extra and get double the capacity, rather than extra speeds that don't really translate into any difference for gaming, at least at the time of filming. Make sure you've removed the little sticker from the back of this. Then you can just drop this on top, fit this into position, and then we can proceed to grab our cooler, because of course if you're going for an air cooler, you're going to want to fit this now. It's a lot easier to do this on the board than when it's inside our chassis, but the same does actually apply for the back plate, especially on Intel, to get this thing mounted. And yes, we have pulled out all the stops. I haven't used this since I first tested it, not because I don't like it, but because this is absurdly expensive. This is the brand new ICUE Link 360mm cooler. They do actually do one with an LCD now as well. And this is simultaneously the best cooler I've ever used, but also the one, I don't know, in terms of value for money, let's just say it's not really there. But you have these brand new interlocking fans, and you only need one cable to actually connect everything together, both fan speed, RGB, and because they sort of connect together almost magnetically, they're really easy to expand, and the fans themselves are of ridiculously high quality, and even have these temperature sensors inside them as well that does go into your system, and you can log it all with software. So if you want like the craziest fans and the best cooling systems really out there, then I would strongly consider this, but do be aware it does get very expensive. So we'll grab our little Intel retention backplate, we'll flip our motherboard over, and then we'll just line this up with the screw holes. Then you grab these little Intel screws, plop those onto the motherboard. Then we can move this to one side, grab our case, lay it down flat, and do our live transplant. Screw and fit it down, but now we can press on and actually install our radiator. And at this point, I'd love to tell you that there's a quick release bracket for this removable radiator slash fan mount they have at the top, but sadly it's 6 screws, which kind of defeats the whole point, because I could just hold this up and then actually screw into it. I want the process to be easy, not just more steps for the sake of it. I'm more doing this just to test it out rather than because I think it's going to make my life simpler and easier. Do be advised with the way that You can put a 280 fan here, but it's kind of going to be more offset one way round than the other. So I've actually turned this 180 degrees, and then I'm going to fit this down into position. Now, I'm not sure whether to be annoyed or not, because they've gone for less flexibility, but then better quality holes. And by that, I mean, you don't need a washer for this to actually properly grip the top of this plate, which is nice. Then it does give you less flexibility about positioning and things. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts here. Let's then proceed to drop this down into position, just like that. I mean, to be fair, it is easier to drop it like that. It means you don't need to have 3 hands, which, let's be honest, most of us, well, don't. Let's screw this back down, double check that the top actually will fit. Yeah, looks good to me. Cool, no issues there. Grab our Intel fixing plate and then attach this to the cooler. But because I've used this cooler before, we will need to grab ourselves some thermal paste. And I'm going to do a very small amount here because I am, of course, only using this CPU for mere minutes whilst we flash the BIOS, and then we'll swap it over for our i9. Place that on top, grab our big thumb screws, and then just screw them down. Now comes the more fiddly bits of actually getting everything else connected. We do, of course, have all of our front panel connections, and these are tied up neatly around the back, so we all have to connect these to the main board. But then for our cooler, we have this little junction box here that will handle the rest, essentially. And we do have this little dummy connection here that will just plug in at the top, alongside our power and our USB. I think we can just plop this on the side like that, as it's magnetic, start routing all of our cables through. That actually isn't going to be that easy, because once again, we don't really have any cable grommets or anything. We've got some potential tie-down points, but that's it. £165 for no cable grommets, so we're going to see these from the other side, and no tie-down points, really. I mean, the whole thing is so weird as well, because you can actually remove this cable management plate and then have fans here, which is nice. And they've even gone as far to actually give you these little tie-down points here for those fan cables. So why have you thought about it here, but then not here? You've got to do everything yourself these days, don't you? But then that actually is about it, really. We just need to add the graphics card and the power supply. And because I'm in charge around here, we're going to go for the most exciting bit first, which is to remove 3 PCIe slot covers, and then grab our 4090 FE and just drop this down into position. You just line it up with the slot, give it a good push home so you get a bit of a click, and then just screw it down with the hex screws. And with that then, the excitement continues to the final component, and it's definitely not one I've just swapped out from finding that there wasn't a ATX 3 PCI Gen 5 connection on the power supply that I originally had, and I went to quickly swap it out. Oh no, this was the original plan all along. This is from Thermaltake. This is the Tough Power PF3 1200 watts. It's platinum rated, which is pretty insane, but then obviously the irony is you're spending more money for a more efficient one in the first place. But the main reason you're going to go for this is because I would recommend 1000 watts or more for this, because the 4900K is going to use a lot of power, and so is that 4090. But fundamentally, unless you're going to swap out the cable with something third party, I don't want to have to use the adapter that comes with this. So I want a power supply that will actually give you a Gen 5 connection straight out of the box, just like this. This one delivers up to 600 watts over a single cable, so let's plug this in alongside all of our other connections. We'll screw this down into position, grab our trailing mess of cables, feed all of that through, and then just line that up, get that nice and secure, and then you can start plugging in all of your cables. I mean, we've got this PCIe connection that delivers power to the Corsair hub. We've then got a SATA connection for our RGB hub, and then everything else is of course on the inside, starting with our CPU up here at the top left. Hi, it's me, Future Marcus here. Don't look at that, that's cheating. I realized that I only plugged one 8-pin in, whereas for this, because it's a very high power CPU, make sure you plug 2 8-pins into your motherboard. Our large ATX is then on the right hand side. And then last but certainly not least, we have our single PCI Gen 5 connection, and then make sure that is properly pushed in until it clicks, and then there you go. That is our completed-ish rig. Obviously we need to put our side panels back on. The cable management actually wasn't too bad in the end, especially once we put this other plate here that's going to cover everything up nicely. You've got loads of room down the bottom where you could stow some cables, or of course you could populate this with extra fans if you want to do something a little bit different. But I want to see what this is going to look like once it is fully purple. Side piece? Yeah, okay, there we go. The purple color has emerged, and we can now take a proper look at our rig. I mean, it works. It definitely does work. I mean, the system might not, but that's a problem for future me. But I don't know, do I like this case enough to recommend it just for that purple color. I'm not convinced, to be honest with you. It's not that there's necessarily anything really wrong with it. It was easy enough to build in, despite the fact that there were things that could be improved. But I mean, if you told me this was £100, I'd say that's a decent case for £100. For 165, I think that's quite steep. But then again, that is the RRP, and I imagine the price of this will come down. So don't discount this. Wait until it is discounted. So let's see if it works and if it passes stage 1, which of course means grabbing our keyboard and mouse, and of course the PC-centric mouse mat. If you want to grab one of these, link to this is down below. Cool, so power is in, power switch is on. We have some RGB. Are we going to get any fans though? Doesn't actually look like it. What have I done wrong? I've probably not connected this properly, have I? Whoops. Yep. Let's go again. Yes! Well, I see fan speed. That's always a good start. I hear a pump. Yes, there we go. Look at that. I mean, clearly we are going to have to make all of these fans purple later to properly complete the theme. And we do also have a little Asrock loading screen, which is nice. And we're in! Except we still need to update the BIOS. Even the BIOS is purple! Let's grab our new BIOS on a USB, head over to Instant Flash, and just hit update. I've never had a purple BIOS update screen before. That is commitment. And with our i3 removed, we can then upgrade our chip to the full fat i9 14900K. This is why you should do it facing downwards, because frankly, this is a stupid thing to do. More thermal paste, CPU head block back on, flip the switch back on, and hope for the best. We should now boot, well, as we were before, really. It will come up and say new CPU installed. If after all this, it doesn't work,
I'm gonna be livid.
Yes, yes, yes. And something I have already noticed is that this rig is already a lot louder than it was before, unsurprisingly, i3 versus i9. So just give me a little bit of time to get all of the games installed. We'll get XMP enabled on this to make sure our RAM is running at its full speed. We'll get it tuned, and then we can test out some gaming performance. And through the power of editing, we are all set up and ready to go. I have made a couple of adjustments. We have added that extra cable for the CPU power. The fans actually were set to intake rather than exhaust, so I've swapped those around, and those can now go out the top. And I have noticed something that has quite annoyed me actually about this chassis, is that you have so much space at the top for your radiator, but if you are using a 240 or a 360, the fans are quite pushed that way, but there is loads of room here, but you don't actually have the grooves to push them outwards, which means that the cables at the top here are very close to the fans. That's really quite frustrating and, to be honest, completely unnecessary. But other than that, I really do love the look of this system. It is nice to go for something a little bit different. I mean, granted, if you are going to put purple RGB over the whole thing, you can't quite see the purple motherboard, which was kind of the whole point in the first place, but still, the whole thing honestly does look great. It does stand out, it does look different, but again, don't want to sound like a broken record. £165 for this case, I still think is a little bit steep. But let's jump into the game. And of course, we're gonna begin with the star of our show, some Alan Wake 2. And I actually played this for an hour or so earlier just to make sure we can get into the game properly and to familiarize myself with all of the settings. And this is the default, and as you can see, we're currently getting about 150 frames a second. I mean, this is an absolutely stunning looking game, and it does it with not just high quality assets, but it is all about the lighting and the RTX effects that you get here. So let's actually go over into the settings and show you what we have on offer. So this is currently running at 4K with DLSS set to performance. That's the super resolution. But this is running the full DLSS 3.5 package. So we have everything here, including DLSS frame generation. And then if we scroll all the way down, we do also have all of our ray tracing settings as well. So what we're going to do is set everything to max. Gonna max this one out, baby. Including the ray tracing at the highest quality preset with the brand new feature actually that's called DLSS Ray Reconstruction. And essentially this is an AI denoiser that works a little bit more efficiently, and it does a better job of cleaning up the image after you've done your path tracing runs. And it actually does make a quite dramatic difference. You can see my full video on this in the top right corner of your screen when we actually had a look at this in Cyberpunk. But it worked really well there just to give you a better looking image with less artifacts. So I'm sure this will do the same here today. And yes, here we are, 4K DLSS performance, and let's have a look. I mean, just look at this. It is an absolutely stunning game. And this is the sort of title as well that 1 second it's going to be like this, very light, very I don't know, you've got all of these reflections and things going on. It's just a very visual scene. It's very scenic. But then a little bit later in the game, once we start actually getting some baddies coming at us, then we are going to have some very low light scenes where all of that local reflections and I guess more of the diffused lighting that you're going to get from the path tracing, it's just going to give you a much more immersive experience and it's going to be a lot more true to life. But before we move on, let's have a look at this in 1440p. Look at that, about 150, 160 FPS, and loads of you are going to be playing on a 1440p monitor with a 4090. That is pretty insane, and the latency has jumped down a lot as well, to around about 40 milliseconds or so it does feel a little bit snappier. But if we turn frame generation off, you will now see that we're actually now under 100 frames a second. Still around about 30, maybe 35 milliseconds of latency, but that is quite a big difference to the overall smoothness of the image. Obviously, if you're playing on a 60 Hz monitor or TV, this probably wouldn't matter so much, but anyone that's got a high resolution and high refresh rate monitor, this is going to be very, very beneficial. And then we're going to set the resolution to 2560 by 1440 using NVIDIA's deep learning anti-aliasing. So this is actually very similar to DLSS, whereas it doesn't actually downscale the image and then upscale it. It renders natively and then does the same sharpening technique. So it's a really good way of getting yourself a really high quality image actually. I mean, you can tell that this is probably the best 1440p image we've seen, but then again the frame rate has now dropped down quite dramatically as we're currently only getting about 70 frames a second or so, which, don't get me wrong, is still very good, but you do have all of these additional technologies on offer that you can utilize. So I think it's definitely worth having a play around with the settings to find the right settings for you, but I personally would either run this or DLSS set to quality and then use DLSS 3 frame generation for best results. But whoa everybody, hang on a second, because this is very much a game of two halves, and I think showing you just the lighting from one scene wouldn't really do this justice. So we're a little bit further ahead now. We're playing in some dark tunnels. We have our flashlight that we can toggle on and off, and as you can see, the game world does really dramatically change depending on, well, the lighting of the scene really, which is what path tracing is all about really. So you not only get like the really cool screenshots from all of the reflections, but it's all about the way the light actually reflects and refracts off the different surfaces, and that's what really helps to make this game world come alive actually. I mean, the frame rate has been pretty consistent throughout the game actually. There are definitely some stronger areas and some weaker areas, but I haven't actually had to change the settings once, and it's felt very fluid throughout. I mean, I'm going to show you something pretty cool now. We can watch the lighting dynamically change to red, and you can see what that does to the room. It's really, really quite cool stuff actually. And you have loads of effects like this throughout the game actually, and again, it just makes the game world look a whole lot more real and immersive. But anyway, didn't want you to miss out on that. Back to past Marcus. Let's have a look how it works over in Cyberpunk now, but I do need to put this side panel on so we can get some proper thermal testing done, and we can do our peel. Other than hitting the mouse, I'd say that was a 10 out of 10. Let's jump straight into our city, shall we? And this is actually running at 4K with DLSS set to quality, but ray tracing entirely disabled. And you can see that, again, the assets here are very, very good. And I mean, I still think this is a fantastic looking game, but especially coming from Alan Wake, you can tell that the lighting here is just a little bit flat. Just something about the image just doesn't quite look right, and it is the lack of any advanced lighting. So what we will do is have a look at our frame rate, which is 165 FPS. We'll then go into our settings. So what did we have? Frame generation was on, super resolution was set to auto, but let's now scroll down and turn our ray tracing to ultra.
Or psycho, I should say.
But let's leave path tracing off for now. So here you can see, we still have a very, very stable image and frame rate. We're getting about 140 frames a second, still way under that 55, 60 milliseconds of latency, I'd say, for it to be properly noticeable. And yeah, you can already tell that the lighting here does make a huge difference. I mean, it's not quite full path tracing, but again, everything just looks a lot more realistic. And you do just have a scene that is just a lot more alive, I'd say. But let's go into the settings and activate the dream setting, the full path tracing. And as you'd expect, the frame rate does now drop down. We do lose a fair bit of performance with path tracing, but we're still getting over 100 frames a second at the moment, which is pretty insane. And yet the whole city has just now come alive. And this is a brilliant example actually of how you have so many different light sources and the game is able to sort of intelligently work out exactly what color each pixel should be, and it just gives you a lot more realistic lighting as we drive throughout the city. It's quite something. It really is something to behold. But of course, we do also have one more setting, which is that ray reconstruction. We'll turn that on. I would expect our frame rate probably to jump up by a couple of FPS, but obviously it's going to be so variable when you're driving throughout the city. But what this does, again, is just essentially clears up some of those reflections, really, just to make them a little bit more realistic. And in some cases, they look a bit more high resolution as well. I don't really see any reason not to enable it. It does actually make quite a big dramatic difference when you're doing a side-by-side. But let's press on now to some more multiplayer titles, with one that I know is a lot of you guys' favourites, some Call of Duty Warzone. And while we're waiting for the lobby to fill, we can go over to the settings and show you what we're going to be using. I mean, it's actually pretty straightforward. We've got 4K, everything is set to max, and we also have DLSS set to performance. So now is the moment of truth, no lobby, this is real frame rate. What are we going to get in game? We're actually going to get close to the 200 FPS mark. 200 FPS in Call of Duty Warzone, and this is a title that is traditionally very CPU bottlenecked, especially when you have a very high-end GPU. So it is actually quite nice to see that the 14900K is doing a decent job. I mean, you are going to get different results, again, depending on whether you go for the AMD's 7800X3D or if you go for Intel's 14900K, but it is going to vary from game to game. So the absolute fastest gaming PC is technically going to vary, right? But I'm very pleased with how it's doing at the moment. I mean, as I say, we are ever so slightly bottlenecked on the CPU, and not really by a huge margin. I mean, what we can do is to actually turn the DLSS up a little bit to balanced, because I don't think we're going to lose a huge amount of frame rate here. Let's do that and have a look. I mean, it's dipped ever so slightly. We're now under the 200 FPS mark, but we are going to see less CPU bottlenecking, so it's almost like we've got a bit extra performance on tap here, really. So yeah, I mean, if you want to play Call of Duty Warzone, clearly this is a very good rig to do it on. It does also support NVIDIA's Reflex technology as well, which aims to reduce the latency that you'll see in your game. I mean, we're currently getting about 14 milliseconds of latency right now. Not too shabby, especially bear in mind we're playing this at a 4K DLSS resolution. And in terms of our noise test, actually really impressed with this. For what is a ridiculously high-end system, it is actually one of the quietest we've built as well. I mean, in terms of temperatures, we're currently looking at just 60 degrees on that GPU, 74, 75 on the CPU. Obviously that will go up if you're doing something that is more intensive using all of the cores. But yeah, this is a pretty slick little system for gaming. But let's press on to the game that was my favorite. I was playing this day in, day out for hours, and yes, I'm clearly filming this on Halloween if you can't work that one out. This is Apex Legends. This is running at absolute max settings, 4K resolution, and I wouldn't be surprised if when we get down to the floor we get close to 300 FPS. I'm gonna guess about 260. Let's have a look. Yes, there it is. I know my game. 260 FPS. I mean, again, this is obviously going to vary quite a lot depending on when and where you are in the game, but look at that. Look, pretty much right on the money. 260, 270 FPS. That is pretty darn cool. And don't forget, by the way, that this doesn't have DLSS or any upscaling techniques or anything. This is actually running at native resolution, which is pretty darn cool, isn't it? Oh, come on, come on. Oh, blow. I'm back in. I'm back in. Ah, well, I tried. But actually, that is probably a good time to actually wrap this up. And I have to say that this is a ridiculously good PC that I think everyone watching would love to have, because it's among the fastest you can buy. I mean, you know, it's going to be up for debate. Should you go for the AMD CPU or you go for Intel? You know, it's going to be up to you. It will vary depending on the game. But the fact that it is so quiet as well, bearing in mind it uses quite a lot of power, I think is very impressive. It looks absolutely divine, and the temperatures of everything are well within the limit for gaming. I mean, it's fantastic, really. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, though. What do you make of it? What do you like? What do you dislike? And of course, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, including the AMD Ryzen alternative to this, and obviously the different motherboard that doesn't need flashing, I'll leave Amazon affiliate links to everything featured alongside my suggestions with my Amazon affiliate links listed down below. But thank you so much for watching this video. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed it, and we'll catch you in the next one.